Next story. The warning was old. The sign at the trailhead looked newer than the warning bolted beneath it, and that older warning kept showing up in later records. In late October of 2019, Ranger Leah Morgan was 34 and working the Olympic Peninsula near Port Angeles. She had been assigned to routine patrols after heavy rain because small slides kept blocking spur roads and access gates. State records show she checked the Salduke area by mid-morning, then drove south toward a lesser-used river trail. Her purpose was simple and documented: verify closures were posted and log any downed trees before the weekend visitors arrived. Dispatch logs later noted her radio signal weakened as she entered a valley where the ridgeline cut off line of sight. At 1:30, a call came from Mark Heller, a 41-year-old deputy with Clallam County assigned as duty officer. He said a vehicle had been sitting since dawn at a pullout near the trail, and the registered owner was not answering. The owner was Evan Rios, 27, a wildlife photographer from Tacoma who reportedly traveled alone for a 2-day shoot. County file from 2009 had flagged that same corridor for repeated overdue hikers, though investigators never confirmed a single cause. Leah drove in and photographed the windshield permit because archive notes recommended preserving small details before weather erased them. The permit listed Evans' plan as a loop along the river, then a climb to a low saddle for evening elk photos. Some locals claimed the river trail was safe if you stayed on gravel bars, but records conflict on where the true tread begins. Leah found Evans' car locked, with a dry backpack visible in the rear and a coffee cup still upright in the console. There was no trash and no sleeping bag, which matched a day hike and matched what Evan reportedly told a friend. Leah radioed Mark and requested a quiet welfare check protocol because weekend hikers were nearby and panic spreads fast. Dispatch logs show the request went through at 2:12, and a search plan began as rain returned in short bursts. Leah walked the first mile alone, looking for boot prints where mud held impressions and where alder roots formed natural steps. She noted fresh scuffs on the warning sign, as if someone had steadied themselves there, then stepped off toward the river. That warning was dated 2011, and it mentioned unstable bank shelves and sudden water rises without listing a source. Investigators never confirmed who wrote it because the sign shop records were incomplete and the county archive had gaps. Leah followed a faint sidetrack that paralleled the water because it showed recent use and it avoided a slick footbridge. Reportedly, she found a camera lens cap near a mossy log and she marked it with flagging tape for later collection. Mark arrived with 2 volunteers from a local SAR team and they carried rope and a medical kit sealed in plastic. Their stated goal was to reach Evan before nightfall, then hold position until a full grid team could deploy at daylight. Around 4, archive notes show Leah advised against crossing the river because the current had shifted and visibility was poor. Still, a set of prints appeared on wet stones, and the stride length suggested a hurried pace rather than careful footing. The prints ended at a bank where brush was broken, as if someone pushed through and slid down toward a narrow gravel shelf. Leah recorded the scene on her phone, then wrote a short entry that later appeared in state records as a field memo. It stated the water level was rising faster than expected and that the broken brush pointed to movement upstream. Some locals claimed a hidden game trail cut above that bank, but investigators never confirmed it because vegetation regrew quickly. By dusk, dispatch logs show Leah requested a drone, but wind in the canyon made flight unsafe and the request was denied. Mark set a staging point near the warning sign and he asked Leah to remain on the main trail for accountability. She agreed, then made a second sweep in widening circles, stopping every few minutes to listen for shouts or metal clicks. No response came back, and the only consistent sound was water striking stones, then retreating into deeper channels. At 7, rain turned steady and cold, and the SAR volunteers noted hypothermia risk increased for anyone without shelter. Leah reviewed Evan's social posts from that week because reportedly he posted a photo of a similar valley with fresh elk tracks. Records conflict on whether that photo was taken here or farther south, but the tree line and riverbend looked similar. Mark contacted Evan's emergency number, and a roommate said Evan carried a small headlamp and a thin jacket. The roommate also said Evan was stubborn about getting a last shot at dusk, which aligned with the permit time estimates. At first light the next day, a full team arrived with dogs, and Leah briefed them using the field memo and photos. State records show the dogs tracked toward the river, then lost scent at a shallow crossing where water churned over gravel. Searchers expanded upstream and downstream, checking log jams and undercut banks where a person could be trapped unseen. One volunteer reported finding a boot print on a mud shelf, but investigators never confirmed it because the print was partial. Leah revisited the warning sign and scraped away lichen, revealing older bolt holes that suggested a previous plaque existed. Archive notes from 2009 mentioned a plaque that warned of sinkholes, but the county file from 2009 lacked photos. Records conflict on whether sinkholes were ever mapped there, and the Geological Survey summary was missing key pages. Still, Leah directed a team to probe soft ground near the bank using poles to test for hollow pockets. They found one patch that gave way slightly, but no opening appeared and the soil held together under pressure. Later that afternoon, dispatch logs noted a brief ping from Evan's phone, reportedly caught by a tower near Forks. Investigators never confirmed if it was his device because the carrier records only showed an automated registration event. Mark requested a helicopter sweep, and state records show it flew 2 passes, but cloud cover forced an early return. From the air, the river looked like dark ribboned glass, broken by white seams where rapids hid debris and trapped branches. On day 3, a ranger from another district brought archive notes about a missing hunter in 2011. Those notes described a similar vehicle left at the same pullout and a search that ended when winter storms closed roads. Investigators never confirmed a link, but the repeated pattern was recorded in a state summary as a cautionary parallel. Leah and Mark compared timelines, focusing on weather and river height because both cases mentioned sudden water rise. A hydrology log from a nearby gauge showed a spike overnight, which matched Leah's earlier memo and supported the crossing risk. Even with that, some locals claimed Evan would have avoided water because photographers protect gear and plan around storms. Records conflict on that assumption because Evan's camera bag was never found and no one knew how he carried it. On day 5, a volunteer found a torn map corner wedged in driftwood, and Leah photographed it before bagging it. It matched the correct district map, but the tear made the route lines unclear, and investigators never confirmed it belonged to Evan. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Mark logged the find in county records, noting it was upstream of the car and closer to the bank where brush was broken. The team searched that stretch again, moving slower and checking every eddy where items could circle and settle. No pack surfaced, and no clear clothing appeared, only small scraps of plastic that could not be tied to any missing person. On day 7, Leah wrote a final field note that the older warning seemed out of place because it referred to hazards not posted elsewhere. She requested sign shop archives, but state records show the request returned incomplete, citing a storage move and missing boxes. Investigators never confirmed why that warning remained when other signs were replaced, and the maintenance ledger had conflicting entries. Mark closed the active operation after 10 days, shifting to periodic checks, because resources were needed for a storm response. Evan remained listed as missing, and the file stayed open with a note that evidence was limited and conditions were rapidly changing. Months later, archive notes show a hiker reported seeing a faded plaque face down in brush, but it was never recovered. Some locals claimed it was removed to avoid liability, while others said floods simply moved everything, and investigators never confirmed either claim. The only consistent detail across dispatch logs, state records, and county paperwork was the presence of that older warning. It was not new advice and it was not dramatic, yet it survived long enough to become the clearest repeated marker. When the file was reviewed again in 2021, records conflict on whether additional searches were authorized and no new trace was logged. Leah remained in the district for several more seasons, continuing routine patrols, and the warning stayed bolted in place. Next story. The radio clicked once. On a cold October morning near Bishop, California, a park ranger heard his radio click once, then go dead forever. Ranger Caleb Harlan was 34, a seasonal backcountry ranger assigned to the eastern Sierra Nevada corridor that month. He had transferred from trail maintenance, hoping for steadier hours and a chance to qualify for a permanent role. His shift started before sunrise, and he planned to check remote camps for fire rings and unregistered vehicles. Dispatch logs later placed him on a service road heading toward a trailhead outside town, reportedly moving alone. Nothing about the plan sounded risky, and state records show he carried standard gear and a single spare battery. That same week, Leah Moreno arrived from Reno, Nevada, age 29, a graduate student collecting water samples for her thesis. She had permits for creeks along the foothills, and she kept a strict schedule because her grant clock was tight. Her friend dropped her at a campground store, then watched her shoulder a pack and walk toward the forest road. County file from 2009 mentions similar student trips in the area, with notes about confusing spur roads. Leah texted one last time at 7:18 a.m., saying the air smelled like wet pine and the sky looked low. By 9:40 a.m., Caleb radioed dispatch to report a locked gate that should have been open for authorized traffic. The line was clear and he sounded calm, stating he would hike in to check for storm damage. Dispatch replied with routine acknowledgement, then asked for his next check-in at 11 a.m. sharp. Archive notes show the dispatcher wrote his unit number twice, as if double-checking the channel assignment. At 10:12 a.m., the radio clicked once on the base station speaker, then there was only empty carrier hiss. Investigators later disagreed on what that click meant because the radio system logged no formal transmission at that time. Some locals claimed a click could happen when a handset keyed briefly, but technicians never confirmed that claim. Records conflict on whether the repeater had been serviced that month, and maintenance tickets were incomplete. Caleb did not answer follow-up calls, and dispatch logged 3 unanswered hails over the next 30 minutes. At 11:28 a.m., a supervisor drove to the gate and found Caleb's truck parked neatly, engine off, keys missing. The truck bed held a shovel, a coil of rope, and a clipboard with campsite inspection sheets half filled. His lunch cooler sat on the passenger floor, and a thermos was still warm, suggesting he had left recently. Boot prints led away from the gate, then split across gravel where wind and light rain quickly blurred detail. A set of smaller prints appeared beside the ranger's track for a short stretch, then vanished into brush. Investigators never confirmed those smaller prints belonged to Leah, though the sizing roughly matched her boots. Search managers established a command post near the trailhead outside Inyo National Forest, coordinating volunteers and deputies. They used dogs, ATVs, and a helicopter, but cloud cover pushed aircraft low and limited visibility. Dispatch logs show the radio channel was switched twice, and crews complained of faint reception in canyons. Caleb's handheld radio was not found on his truck seat, and that absence became a focus in early briefings. Leah was reported overdue that afternoon when she missed a scheduled call and her friend drove back to town alone. The combined timeline looked simple at first because both disappearances occurred within hours and within the same drainage. Yet state records show their legal access points differed and their permitted routes did not actually overlap on paper. Investigators mapped every spur road, then learned the area had unofficial cut-throughs made by hunters and locals. Some locals claimed a washed-out bridge forced people onto those cut-throughs, but supervisors said the bridge was passable. That disagreement mattered because it changed whether Leah could have reached Caleb's gate without trespassing warnings. On day 2, a volunteer found a water sample bottle in a shallow ditch labeled with Leah's handwriting and a date. The date read October 2019, spelled by her as numerals, matching her notebook style from prior trips. Nearby, searchers found a torn corner of topographic map with a red circle drawn around a creek bend. County deputies photographed the items, then sealed them, and archive notes state the paper was damp but not soaked. No footprints were visible near the ditch, and investigators never confirmed whether the items were dropped or placed. Late that evening, a hunter reported hearing a brief radio squawk from deeper in the canyon, reportedly on the same frequency. He said it sounded like a mic keying, a single click, then a burst of static that cut off abruptly. Dispatch tried to triangulate, but the hunter could not pinpoint direction, and his statement shifted slightly later. Records conflict on whether the hunter was alone because one intake form lists a companion while another lists none. Investigators did not label him a suspect, yet his report kept surfacing in case summaries for years afterward. On day 3, search crews traced Caleb's likely route beyond the gate, following a faint service path toward a ridge. They located fresh scuffs on granite and a broken branch at shoulder height, consistent with someone pushing through quickly. A ranger team found a single latex glove near a boulder field, the same brand used in water sampling kits. The glove was bagged and logged, but state records later note DNA results were inconclusive due to contamination risk. Some locals claimed that proved Leah had been there, but investigators never confirmed the glove belonged to her. As the search expanded, attention turned to a rough spur road known for abandoned camps and occasional illegal dumping. Deputies documented tire ruts that looked recent, and they found a burned patch where trash had been set alight. In that burn area, crews recovered a melted plastic radio clip similar to the belt clip used on Caleb's model. Technicians could not verify the serial number, and archive notes say the piece was too deformed to match definitively. Still, the discovery changed the tone because it suggested equipment had been damaged rather than simply lost. At the command post, supervisors reviewed Caleb's personnel file, trying to rule out voluntary disappearance or conflict at work. They found no disciplinary issues, and his coworkers described him as careful, sometimes overly methodical in reports. His bank activity showed normal spending, and he had recently renewed a lease in Bishop, California for another year. Leah's records showed no known enemies, and her phone history suggested routine contact with family and classmates. Nothing obvious explained why two people would vanish within the same morning in terrain that was dangerous but familiar. Investigators interviewed residents who lived near the forest boundary, focusing on anyone who heard vehicles or shots that morning. One resident said a dark pickup drove past around 8 a.m., moving fast, then returned an hour later, slower. Another resident denied any traffic at all, insisting the road stayed empty until deputies arrived in the afternoon. Records conflict because those interviews were taken days apart, and memory can drift when questions repeat. No license plate was captured, and the description was too common to narrow, according to state records. A week later, a fisherman found Leah's stainless water filter on a sandbar downstream, wedged beneath driftwood. The filter looked scraped, as if it had been dragged over rock, and it carried a faint smell of gasoline. Investigators tested for accelerants, but the results were listed as trace possible, an ambiguous line in archive notes. Some locals claimed the gasoline smell meant a vehicle had been washed nearby, but investigators never confirmed a wash site. The river level had risen after rain, so it was unclear when the filter entered the water or from where. By mid-October, the official search scaled down, replaced by targeted efforts and periodic dog runs after weather shifts. Caleb's family traveled from Boise, Idaho, meeting with supervisors and insisting he would not quit without word. Leah's parents drove from San Jose, California, bringing photos and asking for specific canyon checks. Dispatch logs showed dozens of calls from tipsters, many repeating the hunter's story about a click and short static burst. None of those tips produced a location, and investigators kept returning to the gate as the last confirmed point. In November, a storm exposed something on a steep slope, and a hiker reported a bright strip of fabric near Talus. A ranger team climbed to the spot and recovered a torn backpack strap similar to Leah's model from store receipts. No pack was found, and the strap's tear looked clean, as if cut or ripped under tension, according to notes, is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Investigators never confirmed the cause of the tear, and they cautioned that sharp granite can slice webbing quickly. The discovery kept the case active through winter, though the terrain became inaccessible for weeks at a time. When spring came, technicians inspected the radio repeater again, documenting signal dropouts in certain canyons and ridges. They concluded the click could have been a brief open carrier, possibly triggered by moisture, but they noted uncertainty. That technical ambiguity mattered because it meant the click did not prove distress, yet it also did not rule it out. Some locals claimed the click was Caleb trying to speak while struggling, but investigators never confirmed such a scenario. State records summarized the radio findings as inconclusive, a word repeated in later filings and public statements. In 2021, a new deputy reviewed the case and requested archived notes from earlier missing person files nearby. The county file from 2009 described a lost hunter found alive after wandering onto the same spur road area. That hunter reported hearing voices at night and seeing lights, but the report framed it as misperception under stress. Investigators compared routes and found one overlap, a dry wash that could funnel sound and hide tracks after rain. Records conflict on whether that dry wash was searched thoroughly in 2019 because early maps were incomplete. Another detail surfaced in state records: a call from a tow company about an abandoned sedan found near a different access road. The sedan had no plates and the interior was stripped, but a torn receipt inside mentioned Bishop Fuel at 6:55 a.m. Investigators could not connect the sedan to Caleb or Leah, and archived notes label it possible unrelated property crime. Still, some locals claimed the sedan had been seen near the gate earlier, though those claims appeared years later. Investigators never confirmed those later claims, and the sedan was crushed after a legal holding period expired. Over time, the case split into two competing narratives, both grounded in ordinary risks, yet neither fully supported by evidence. One narrative suggested Leah became injured off-trail and Caleb left his truck to assist after encountering signs of trouble. Another narrative suggested a third party used the remote roads for illicit activity, and both disappeared after crossing paths. Dispatch logs, state records, and witness statements could not decisively favor either narrative, and investigators acknowledged that. The click remained a symbol, because it was the only moment that felt like contact, even if it was only noise. Years later, hikers still report small items found in that corridor: a glove, a buckle, a scrap of map paper. Each report is checked, photographed, and filed, yet most are ruled out or left uncertain due to weather and time. Caleb's name remains on a memorial plaque near the ranger station, and Leah's university keeps her grant listed as unfinished. Investigators never confirmed what happened beyond the gate, and records conflict on small details that could have mattered. All anyone can state with confidence is that on October 2019, the radio clicked once, then both went missing. Next story. The compass was certain. In late October, a park ranger in western Montana logged a search route that made no sense on paper. The route followed a compass bearing that stayed consistent through steep timber, broken shale, and a maze of old burn scars. Dispatch logs later showed the ranger kept repeating one detail: his compass was certain and the land was wrong. When he failed to return, the bearing became the only straight line in a case built from fragments. Ranger Caleb Harlan was 34, employed by the U.S. Forest Service and stationed outside Kalispell for seasonal backcountry patrols. He had been assigned to check late-season trail use near a remote drainage east of Glacier National Park. His stated purpose was routine contact with hunters and an inspection of a washed-out footbridge noted in archive notes. State records listed him as experienced with winter navigation and familiar with fire roads that no longer appeared on newer maps. Some locals claimed he preferred old topographic sheets. Investigators never confirmed why he trusted them more than updated GIS layers. On the morning of October 23, he left the ranger station before sunrise and drove a marked truck to a gravel turnout. County file from 2009 described that turnout as a former logging staging point, later closed after repeated washouts. Reportedly, Caleb signed a field log that included a compass bearing of 312 degrees and the words "steady needle." A second ranger recalled that he carried a standard-issue baseplate compass and a backup model on a lanyard. Dispatch logs showed clear radio checks at 6:41 and 7:18, each time his tone stayed controlled. Weather data from a nearby station recorded low clouds and intermittent sleet, conditions that reduced visibility without stopping travel. At 8:06, Caleb radioed that he had found fresh boot tracks crossing an abandoned spur, heading uphill into mixed fir and larch. He stated the tracks were not on the planned route and might belong to an overdue solo hunter. A volunteer search coordinator later said those first tracks became a focal point, yet the origin was never located. Investigators never confirmed whether the prints were human or distorted by slush. Records conflict on their shape. Caleb then mentioned a faint metallic clicking in his compass housing, though he said the needle remained stable. He added that he would follow the bearing back to the truck if the weather worsened, then ended the call. A second character entered the timeline through paperwork rather than interviews, a hunter named Miles Reardon, 29, from Spokane. He had a temporary license for the area and told friends he planned a 3-day trip for elk sign, returning by Friday. In state records, his planned camp was listed near a creek bend that matched Caleb's inspection zone. Some locals claimed Miles had been seen at a gas station in Columbia Falls the night before. Investigators never confirmed the sighting. His vehicle was later found legally parked at a trailhead 10 miles away, which created immediate uncertainty about where he actually entered. Archive notes from prior seasons showed that hunters sometimes used unofficial cuts to avoid steep climbs, which complicated any timeline. The case file treated Miles as missing and potentially linked, yet it never established contact between him and Caleb. By 9:30, Caleb stopped responding to routine checks, and dispatch logs marked his last confirmed transmission at 9:12. In that final call, he reported he was above a small bench, moving along a consistent bearing despite uneven ground. He stated the compass needle did not drift even when he crossed bands of dark rock, and he described that as unusual. A coworker later wrote in an incident memo that Caleb sounded mildly puzzled rather than alarmed. Weather records show the sleet increased between 9 and 10, with wind gusts that would mask distant shouting. Some locals claimed they heard a single rifle shot around that time. Investigators never confirmed it, and no reports were filed that morning. The official record treated the silence as a possible radio failure until the scheduled noon return passed. Search operations began that afternoon with 2 rangers and a county deputy following Caleb's planned access road. They found his truck locked, with a spare jacket on the passenger seat and a paper map folded to a grid corner. Reportedly, the map had a pencil line drawn at 312 degrees from the turnout, extending across terrain features like it ignored them. A canine team arrived and took scent from the driver door, then tracked 50 yards before losing it near a shallow drainage. Dispatch logs noted poor radio relay in that pocket, yet later testing showed Caleb's handheld should have reached a ridge repeater from certain points. Investigators recorded that boot prints existed in slushy patches near the drainage, though the prints were inconsistent in size. Records conflict on whether those prints belonged to Caleb, to Miles, or to another unknown party. The first physical clue came at dusk when a ranger found a broken compass capsule near a fallen log. The item matched Caleb's standard model, and state records list its serial number as issued to his unit. The clear plastic face was cracked and the needle assembly was missing, which suggested damage beyond ordinary wear. A county deputy photographed the capsule next to a scale card, then sealed it in an evidence bag marked wet conditions. Archive notes later described that the capsule smelled faintly of fuel, though no lab confirmation was documented. Some locals claimed that old logging drums leak chemicals in that drainage. Investigators never confirmed the claim in the final summary. The discovery shifted the search focus uphill along the same bearing because planners assumed Caleb followed his backup compass. Over the next 2 days, teams walked lines parallel to 312 degrees, using GPS tracks to keep spacing. They located a short section of disturbed ground where duff had been scraped aside, exposing pale mineral soil. Reportedly, the scrape looked like a boot heel slide, yet there were no clear toe marks and no matching tread. A small piece of orange survey tape was tied to a sapling nearby, the kind used by trail crews during summer work. County file from 2009 referenced a historic boundary survey in that same drainage, and archive notes mentioned leftover tape markers. Investigators never confirmed whether Caleb placed the tape or encountered it by chance. Records conflict on that point. No blood, fabric, or equipment fragments were reported at that site, and the canine team did not reestablish scent. On the third day, a helicopter crew spotted a dark object in an open slide path, and a ground team hiked in to confirm. The object was Caleb's backpack, partially buried in wet snow, positioned upright against a rock. Inside were his first aid kit, extra batteries, a headlamp, and a field notebook sealed in a plastic bag. The notebook contained 2 entries written in block letters, reportedly steady needle and land wrong, followed by a coordinate set. The coordinates, when plotted, pointed to a ridge saddle 1 mile northwest, roughly along the 312 line. Dispatch logs show the search coordinator requested immediate grid coverage of that saddle before weather worsened. Investigators later noted that leaving a backpack behind was inconsistent with standard survival practice, though no conclusion was attached. The ridge saddle produced another contradiction because it looked traveled yet lacked continuous tracks. Teams found a wind-scoured patch where snow had hardened into crust, making prints hard to hold. A ranger located a single boot impression in a sheltered hollow, and the size was recorded as approximately 11. Caleb wore size 10 boots according to his personnel file, while Miles reportedly wore size 12 based on a retail receipt found in his truck. Records conflict because the impression was partial and the measuring tape was placed at an angle in photographs. Nearby, a small cairn of stacked stones sat on a flat boulder, and it looked deliberately built. Some locals claimed cairns in that area mark old timber routes. Investigators never confirmed that tradition with historical sources. The saddle also had a clear line of sight to a distant valley, yet no one reported hearing whistles or calls from that direction. Late on October 27, dispatch logs recorded a brief radio transmission that could not be traced to a unit ID. The voice was faint and clipped, and the recording captured the words bearing holds and then static. The timestamp placed it after dark, when official teams had pulled back due to freezing rain. A technician later wrote that atmospheric conditions can cause signal skip, which might explain a false reception. Still, the incident report recommended checking the 312 bearing line again at first light. Investigators never confirmed the voice belonged to Caleb, and the audio quality was too poor for comparison. Some locals claimed the transmission was a prank by hunters with private radios, yet no one admitted it and no devices were seized. The record treated the transmission as unverified, though it influenced search allocation. Miles Reardon's status became more central when a friend provided archived notes from his phone, including a saved waypoint labeled Saddle. State records show that waypoint was created 2 days before Caleb disappeared, which raised questions about prior knowledge. Investigators never confirmed whether Miles had scouted the area earlier or whether he copied coordinates from an online forum. A county deputy interviewed a store clerk who recalled selling Miles a cheap compass, yet receipts were not recovered. Some locals claimed Miles asked about an old fire lookout trail. Investigators never confirmed the exact trail name. The case file from 2009 included mention of a decommissioned lookout on a ridge aligned close to 312 degrees from Caleb's turnout. Records conflict on whether the lookout remnants still existed after recent storms. This overlap between Caleb's bearing and Miles's waypoint remained one of the few measurable connections. As November approached, the search shifted from rescue to recovery, and the documentation became more procedural. Teams expanded outward from the backpack location, checking drainages where a fall could carry a body. They used dispatch logs to record each segment, noting snow depth, wind, and ice hazard. One segment report described a narrow rock cleft that emitted a cold draft with a faint odor described as stagnant water. A rope team entered the cleft for 20 feet, then stopped due to narrowing and loose stone. No evidence was recovered there, and investigators never confirmed whether the odor was natural or related. Some locals claimed caves in that region connect through lava tubes, but geological surveys did not support that claim in state records. The cleft remained listed as a hazard point rather than a confirmed lead. In mid-November, a private mapping specialist was brought in to review terrain magnetics because of the broken compass. The specialist wrote that certain rock bands can affect a compass needle at close range, though effects vary by mineral content. Reportedly, the review identified a line of basalt and iron-rich shale crossing the drainage, roughly perpendicular to Caleb's planned route. That finding was included in an appendix, yet the main report did not attribute the disappearance to magnetic anomaly. Records conflict because Caleb described stable readings rather than drift, and a strong anomaly would likely cause visible deviation. A lab note mentioned that the broken capsule had grit embedded near the hinge, consistent with impact on rock. Investigators never confirmed whether the compass broke in a fall, an intentional act, or a struggle. The uncertainty kept the case open under missing person rather than accidental death. A new clue surfaced from an archived notebook kept at the ranger station, separate from Caleb's field book. In that station notebook, a coworker had copied a story from a retired ranger about a straight-line route called the Old Cut. County file from 2009 referenced the Old Cut as a surveyor's line used to move timber with minimal navigation. The note described walking by compass only, ignoring ridges and creeks because the line would eventually intersect a known road. Some locals claimed Caleb talked about testing that method as a personal challenge. Investigators never confirmed the conversation. When planners overlaid the Old Cut line with Caleb's pencil mark, the alignment was close enough to matter. Dispatch logs show the search boss ordered checks along that historical line toward a forgotten road grade. That decision reflected a belief that Caleb kept faith with a bearing even when terrain resisted. The forgotten road grade was located under alder and downed trees, visible only as a berm and faint ditch. On December 2, a team found a piece of reflective tape nailed to a trunk along that grade, the kind used on winter routes. Beneath it sat a small pile of spruce boughs arranged like a makeshift bed. Reportedly, the boughs were fresh relative to surrounding litter, yet snowmelt made timing uncertain. A single energy bar wrapper was found nearby, and it matched a brand issued in ranger packs. The wrapper had no fingerprints suitable for comparison, according to a lab summary, though the summary lacked details. Investigators never confirmed whether Caleb built the bed while injured or whether another person used ranger supplies. Records conflict because no matching footprints were preserved at the site. In January, a thaw exposed more ground near the bough bed, and a volunteer located a stainless steel water bottle wedged in brush. The bottle was stamped with Caleb's initials, which was consistent with his gear list in state records. It was empty and dented, with scrape marks that suggested dragging along rock. A search dog alerted near the bottle, then pulled sharply downhill toward a creek crossing. The handler wrote that the alert was brief and inconsistent, which sometimes indicates old scent or contaminated odor. Dispatch logs show the creek was swollen and loud, masking any human movement and limiting careful listening. Some locals claimed the creek had hidden log jams that trapped debris. Investigators never confirmed that hazard in the report. No additional items were recovered along the creek that day. The bottle reintroduced the possibility that Caleb reached the road grade and then moved again. Miles Reardon's case took a different turn when his bank activities showed a purchase in Missoula on October 24, one day after Caleb vanished. The transaction appeared at a convenience store, and investigators obtained camera footage through state records requests. The footage reportedly showed a man in a cap buying fuel and food, but the face was partially obscured. Records conflict because one deputy wrote the build matched Miles, while another wrote the height looked shorter. Investigators never confirmed identity through facial comparison, and the store clerk could not provide a reliable statement. The transaction raised the possibility that Miles left the backcountry alive, which weakened the theory that both men died in the same area. Some locals claimed Miles had a friend in town who could have used his card. Investigators never confirmed that link. The file treated the transaction as suspicious but unresolved. By spring, the official narrative shifted towards separate timelines, yet the compass bearing remained in every summary. The final seasonal report stated that Caleb's route showed deliberate adherence to 312 degrees despite obstacles, supported by the pencil line and notebook phrase. It also stated that his backpack placement appeared purposeful, as if meant to be found and used as a marker. Investigators never confirmed whether that purpose was survival signaling, evidence staging, or a simple drop during confusion. A technical appendix noted that compasses can fail from shock, temperature, or contamination, but none were proven. Dispatch logs included repeated mentions of stable needle, which contradicted the magnetic anomaly explanation. Some locals claimed the bearing line pointed to private land where access was limited. Investigators never confirmed trespass restrictions in the open file. The case remained open with no determination of cause. In 2019, a hiker reported finding human bone fragments in a drainage west of the original search area. The county coroner recovered the fragments and requested DNA comparison according to state records. The comparison was inconclusive due to degradation, and investigators never confirmed identity publicly. Records conflict because one memo suggested adult male, while another listed unknown age and sex. A second search in that drainage found no additional remains and no gear, which prevented association with Caleb or Miles. Some locals claimed predators could have moved remains across ridges. Investigators never confirmed a plausible path. Archive notes in the file referenced that drainage as outside the 312 line, which reduced its relevance to the compass theory. Still, the discovery was appended to the case as a possible development. The open status did not change. Years later, the ranger station still kept Caleb's field notebook copy in a sealed envelope along with the cracked compass capsule. A training memo used the incident to emphasize redundant navigation and the limits of single-bearing travel in complex terrain. Yet, the memo also acknowledged that Caleb followed policy in many respects, including check-ins and carrying survival gear. The unresolved elements remained the missing needle assembly, the backpack placement, and the unverified radio phrase bearing holds. Investigators never confirmed whether another person was present on the slope when the compass broke. Some locals claimed the old cut line leads to places people avoid, yet the record contains no verified threat or criminal pattern. The only consistent line in the documentation was the one Caleb drew, straight through country that refused to behave. The compass, at least in the paperwork, stayed certain. Next story. The trees opened up. In late October, a park ranger radioed a short message near Bend, Oregon, then the line went quiet for good. Mara Densmore was 34, a seasonal ranger assigned to the Deschutes National Forest, focused on trail closures and late campers. She drove out before sunrise to check a washed culvert and post new warnings near China Hat Road. Her shift plan, kept in archive notes, listed 2 stops and a return to the ranger station by 10 a.m. Reportedly, she told a coworker she wanted the route finished early because winds were rising. Kyle Redd was 29, a volunteer search and rescue tracker with a day job as a HVAC technician in Bend. He had worked a dozen missing hiker calls and kept careful notebooks about boot patterns and soil transfer. When Mara did not check in, he was asked to stand by at the staging lot off Century Drive. Dispatch logs later showed a routine call list until 9:17 a.m. when the first welfare check request was entered. The tone was ordinary, but the timing became the anchor for everything that followed. Deputy Nolan Vance was 41, a Deschutes County deputy who handled backcountry access problems and winter rescues. He arrived with a county map book, a spare radio battery, and a printed copy of Mara's vehicle plate. His goal was simple: locate her truck, confirm she was safe, then close the incident as a delay. State records show the weather that morning shifted from calm to gusts within an hour, with fine grit blowing across open flats. Some locals claimed those winds could erase fresh tracks fast, but investigators never confirmed how quickly. Mara's patrol truck was found at 10:06 a.m. near a bend in a two-track road, parked partly on Pumice Shoulder. The engine was off, the keys were not in the ignition, and the driver door was closed. There was no obvious damage, and the tire marks suggested a controlled stop, not a slide. A plastic clipboard rested on the passenger seat with a blank inspection form and a pen clipped neatly. Records conflict on whether her radio was on the seat or still clipped to her vest. The first search grid focused on the culvert site, a shallow cut where runoff crossed the road toward a stand of lodgepole pine. Kyle walked the ditch line slowly, looking for pressed needles or disturbed volcanic dust. He found one partial boot print that matched Mara's issued tread, but it ended at a patch of churned gravel. Deputy Vance photographed the mark, then noted in his report that wind gusts were already softening edges. Reportedly, a second print was seen by another ranger, but it was never recovered in later photos. By noon, the team expanded toward a drainage that fed into the Deschutes River using orange tape and compass bearings. Mara's coworkers described her as methodical, not reckless, and unlikely to bushwhack without marking her return. Yet the next evidence point came from farther off, a single nitrile glove found snagged on bitterbrush. It was the correct size for standard medical kits, but the brand was common and sold locally. Investigators never confirmed it was hers, but it stayed tagged in the inventory list. Two hikers reported seeing a ranger truck earlier that morning, parked near a small turnout with a view of black lava rock. Their statement, filed in a county file from 2009 that included older missing person templates, was later attached to Mara's case. They said a woman in a dark jacket stood near the tree line, facing inward as if listening. One hiker claimed the trees looked thinner in one spot, like a corridor, but he could not point to it later. Records conflict because the turnout they described did not match the truck location in the first officer log. Searchers returned to the truck and worked outward, measuring circles and checking for discarded gear. Mara's vest was not found, and her personal phone did not connect to any tower after 8:52 a.m. Dispatch logs recorded two brief radio pings from her unit, one at 8:49 and one at 8:53, without intelligible voice. A technician later wrote that the signal strength suggested a low ridge, not a deep canyon. Some locals claimed the high desert could carry radio oddly, but investigators never confirmed that either. That evening, the wind dropped and the temperature fell, creating hard crust on exposed soil by morning. Kyle returned at first light with a dog team, hoping scent would hold in the colder air. The dogs worked with purpose for 15 minutes, then circled back toward the truck repeatedly. The handler wrote in archived notes that the dogs acted as if the starting point was contaminated by many boots. Deputy Vance requested a new perimeter, but the earlier traffic could not be undone. On day 2, a fresh witness came forward from the outskirts of La Pine, south of Bend. He was a 52-year-old wood hauler who used forest roads for cutting permits and claimed he passed Mara's truck around 9 a.m. He said he saw another vehicle, an older white SUV, idling farther ahead near a stand of pine. The witness could not provide a plate, and he admitted he did not stop because he was behind schedule. Investigators noted his statement, but state records show no matching traffic stop or camera hit. The SUV detail pushed the case toward a possible human encounter, but physical evidence stayed thin. Searchers found no broken branches, no dragged lines, and no clear path leading away from the road. A canine team later alerted on a spot near a low berm, then lost interest within minutes. The handler recorded that the area smelled heavily of fuel and exhaust, which can mask human scent. Reportedly, a faint scuff line was seen in dust, but it disappeared when wind resumed at midday. By the third day, resources increased, including a helicopter sweep over nearby clearings and lava tubes. The helicopter crew reported no bright clothing or reflective objects and no visible signs of a struggle. Ground teams checked a known homeless camp area near a bend in the river, finding only old fire rings and food wrappers. A ranger filed that Mara carried no large cash and rarely confronted campers without backup. Some locals claimed she had clashed with illegal cutters before, but investigators never confirmed any recent disputes. In a briefing, Deputy Vance emphasized timelines, focusing on the gap between the last radio ping and the truck discovery. He asked each team to document every footstep and every found item with exact coordinates and timestamps. State records show the search area expanded to include a disused spur road leading toward Newberry National Volcanic Monument. The spur ran through mixed pine and open pumice flats with long sight lines and few hiding places. Yet the more ground they covered, the more the case seemed to slip between known explanations. A week later, an item surfaced that sounded promising: a ranger badge holder found near a shallow depression off a game trail. It was not Mara's, but it matched a style used by several seasonal staff over past years. The finding was logged, photographed, and then traced to a ranger who had lost it during training in 2011. That correction came from archived notes in a station binder, not from memory alone. The false lead hardened a pattern. Many objects in that forest looked relevant until they were anchored to a date. Mara's family arrived from Idaho, bringing recent photos and a list of her habits. They said she always carried a small notebook, a folding knife, and a bright headlamp on a lanyard. Searchers were told to look for the headlamp specifically because it could catch sunlight in open ground. Despite repeated sweeps, no headlamp was found and no notebook pages were recovered. Reportedly, a hunter later found a lanyard fragment, but the chain of custody was unclear and it was excluded from evidence. By early November, snow began dusting the higher elevations, forcing the search to shift lower. Kyle focused on drainage lines where items might collect, walking slowly through willow and dead grass near shallow water. He noted that the soil here held tracks longer, but it also carried many animal prints that confused patterns. Deputy Vance reviewed dispatch logs again, looking for overlooked calls around 8:50 a.m. The log showed a short medical assist request in Bend, unrelated, yet it matched the exact minute Mara's signal weakened. Investigators later requested cell carrier records, hoping for nearby device pings around Mara's last known location. The carrier response, summarized in state records, showed minimal activity in that sector during the relevant hour. One device connected briefly to a tower segment near Sun River, but its owner was identified and cleared through interviews. The lack of data did not prove isolation, it only showed limited coverage and low traffic. Records conflict on whether Mara's phone was powered off or simply out of range after 8:52 a.m. During the second month, a rumor spread in Bend about a thin gap in the trees, a place people described as a natural passage. Some locals claimed it opened and closed depending on light and wind, making landmarks unreliable. Investigators never confirmed any shifting corridor, but they did map several narrow cuts created by old logging and fire breaks. One of those cuts aligned loosely with the hikers' early statement about a corridor effect. The problem was that the cut was not new, and it led nowhere unusual, only into thicker pine. A separate line of inquiry examined whether Mara could have entered a lava tube or hidden cavity. The region contains volcanic features that can swallow sound and block radio. A specialist team checked known entrances using ropes and headlamps, finding no fresh prints or dropped gear. They reported old trash and animal bones, but nothing tied to a recent disappearance. Reportedly, one small opening near a lava flow was found covered with needles, yet it was too small for an adult. The lava theory stayed in the file because it explained silence, but it never matched evidence. In 2019, several years after Mara vanished, the case was re-reviewed as part of a cold case rotation. The reviewing detective compared original photographs against later satellite imagery for changes in roads and clearings. He noted that a new access track appeared after a controlled burn, potentially altering travel paths. Archived notes from the original search mentioned a tire track set near the berm, but the photo was grainy. Records conflict because the track could have been search vehicles, or it could have been the white SUV witness described. That re-review also highlighted an odd detail about Mara's truck, the driver's seat position. One report said it was set for her height, suggesting she drove it last. Another report suggested the seat was slightly farther back than normal based on a coworker's statement. Investigators never confirmed seat position with measurements on day one, so it remained a subjective point. The re-review treated it cautiously, listing it as unresolved rather than suspicious. Even small uncertainties grew larger in a case with so few hard anchors. A new tip arrived in 2020 from a camper who claimed to have found a headlamp near a shallow creek. The camper said he kept it for a week, then realized it looked like the style used by rangers. He reported it to a station clerk, but the item was not logged into evidence that day. Later, the camper could not produce it, and he said he might have left it in a storage bin during a move. Investigators never confirmed the tip, but it reopened discussions about overlooked objects early in the search. Kyle continued volunteering, and he later spoke to an investigator about patterns in similar cases across Oregon. He described how many disappearances started with a vehicle parked neatly, then no trail into the woods. He also described how wind on pumice flats could erase the simple story of a person walking away. Dispatch logs in Mara's case showed a structured response, but the environment kept undoing structure. Some locals claimed the area had unofficial routes used by cutters, but investigators never confirmed active cutting operations that week. Deputy Vance retired, yet his final report remained one of the clearest documents in the file. He wrote that there was no evidence of panic at the truck, no open door, no scattered paperwork, no broken mirror. He also wrote that disappearance without distress can suggest either sudden medical crisis or a controlled interaction with someone else. The medical crisis theory faced the same obstacle as every other theory, a lack of body or gear despite dense searches. The controlled interaction theory faced another obstacle, no confirmed second vehicle and no consistent witness line. Over time, the phrase, "the trees opened up," became a shorthand in interviews taken from the hiker's earliest description. It did not imply anything supernatural, it referred to a visual effect of thin trunks, wind movement, and shifting shadow. Investigators tried to locate the exact view angle that produced the impression, but the hikers could not reproduce it. State records show repeated site visits in different seasons, with photos taken morning and afternoon. The photos show ordinary pine stands, yet the witnesses insisted there was a moment when the forest looked like a doorway. The case file includes one more unresolved detail, a small scrape on the truck's rear bumper. It was minor, consistent with brush contact on narrow roads, and it was not noted as significant at first. During the cold case review, the scrape was compared with photos of a known gate post nearby. The alignment was close, but investigators never confirmed contact through paint transfer testing. Records conflict because the scrape could have been old, and the truck had been used on rough roads all season. Today, Mara's disappearance remains listed as unresolved in county and state systems, with no confirmed sightings after that morning. The documented facts stay simple. A ranger left for routine checks near Bend, then her truck was found and her trail went cold. The rest is built from reportedly statements, dispatch logs, state records, archived notes, and a county file from 2009. Some locals claimed they understood what happened in that corridor of trees, but investigators never confirmed any single version. The file ends without closure, as if the landscape kept its own record and refused to share it.